Hello, coaches! Welcome to the lecture on metaphors and on how you can use them as a coaching intervention. As coaches, we hear metaphors all the time. Our clients are stuck, or they're at the end of their rope, they hit a brick wall, their marriages feel like a prison. You get the idea. I myself am someone who was born behind the Iron Curtain, which was the result of the Cold War, and eventually my country of origin found freedom thanks to the Velvet Revolution, as history now calls it. Have you noticed how many metaphors I used in that one sentence? Iron Curtain, Cold War, Velvet Revolution. My point is, metaphors are everywhere. Research shows that speakers use metaphors several times per minute. Using metaphors in coaching is often considered to be an advanced coaching skill. And it's true, it takes a little bit of time to train your brain to recognize metaphors in your client's speech and to learn how to construct them effectively. My objective in this lecture is to break this topic down for you a little so that you can understand how metaphors can be used in coaching and so that you can start using them right away in your practice. Technically speaking, a metaphor can be both a short phrase as well as an entire story. But in this lecture, we will focus on the simpler form of metaphors rather than stories with characters, plots, and resolutions. Many great thinkers and philosophers have used metaphors in their teachings and took advantage of their power. Whether it's Freud and his sexual symbolism or different religious texts such as the Old Testament, metaphors are omnipresent, and the reason is that they are an incredibly effective tool for changing beliefs as well as for affecting human behavior, which is also why you want to start using them in your coaching practice. As far as we know, humans are the only creatures able to use metaphors. In fact, there is a specific part of our brain situated in the left parietal lobe that is involved in brain functions unique to humans, such as arithmetic or metaphor. And we know this because patients with damage to this part of the brain tend to lose the ability to understand metaphor and become extremely literal. For instance, if you told them all that glitters is not gold and asked them what that metaphor means, they would tell you that there might be another yellow type of metal that does not glitter. What I'm getting at is that because our brain evolved this part that specializes in processing metaphors, the human mind is extremely open to them. In fact, we seem to process a lot of our experience through the language of metaphors and symbols. The implications of this for coaches are huge, so let me show you one by one. Metaphors have a really wide range of use in coaching, and I know that after this lecture and after hearing the examples I've selected for you, you will be able to spot them in all of the Module 2 coaching calls, as Crystal has really mastered this skill and uses them a lot. If you have listened to the lecture on how to prepare for your second and third sessions, you will know that in your client sheet, there's a section where you take note of the keywords and metaphors your client uses. One of the reasons you want to pay attention to these is that you can later use the same ones in your language in order to deepen rapport or recreate it sometimes. Because remember, when you're coaching and you get your client to step out of their comfort zone, the rapport may temporarily break, and you will be in and out of rapport during your sessions. The keywords your clients use repeatedly, or metaphors they use as they speak, are a great way to both establish rapport or to re-establish it again if you need to. In other words, instead of using the language that is comfortable and familiar to you, you want to make an effort and describe reality in a way that your client would describe it. Let me be more specific. Your clients may say something like, "I'm tired of carrying this heavy baggage with me all the time." And when people say things like that, they literally see the picture inside their mind or kinesthetically feel the heaviness of that baggage. And if you've noticed these figures of speech, you can communicate with your clients in a way that does not damage your rapport too much, especially if you want to say something uncomfortable. For example, instead of saying, I want to tell you something that will help you solve your problem, you can say, I want to tell you something that I really believe is going to help you get rid of that heavy baggage that you're carrying all the time. If you're open to what I'm about to tell you, you might become completely free of that baggage. And if they use the word baggage, you might want to stick to that instead of calling their problem a burden or a bag, if they called it baggage specifically. Metaphors often make it easier for people to describe what's going on for them. They give you, as a coach, an insight into your client's unique perception of their experience, which in turn helps you understand them better. Metaphors are thus a very effective tool for information gathering. The client you're going to hear in the next excerpt says she was raised to be a people pleaser and that she learned not to rock the boat. She says she has always chosen the safe route, and she doesn't want to do that anymore. Now, because this is still the very beginning of our first call, and therefore at this point I just want to affirm to her that I hear her, I decided to deepen our rapport by making a reference to the country her parents originally came from, Ukraine, because I knew she identified strongly with her Ukrainian background. I had two reasons for using this metaphor. First, I wanted to deepen our rapport, and second, my hope was that she would unconsciously find similarity between Ukraine as a country that has a lot of potential, but was not able to develop it for numerous reasons, and herself, since she talked about blockages and limitations in her own life and in herself, yet she knew that she had a lot of potential. Notice how mentioning her family's country of origin resonates with her, and how that rapport deepening brings her right into another metaphor that shows me how exactly her problem is represented in her mind. Listen to how she describes feeling like being in a boxing ring.
I have a block. I've had a block for years and years, and I've always gone the safe route. And
well, of course. I mean, if your parents come from the Ukraine, which has always been the culture, you know what they say about Ukraine, the economists, that there's a lot of they call it black soil, don't they?
Yeah.
The soil that's really, really fertile, and normally Ukraine should supposed to be rich because there's some gas too.
Yeah.
And it's a huge territory. However, it has been tortured all the time. So I'm thinking if your parents come from that, of course you would be brought up, to go for the safe route.
Yep, absolutely. But it's very limiting, and it's something that I've been fighting forever. Forever. So imagine, it's like, I just got a picture in my head of me in a boxing ring.
In a boxing ring?
With
You're such a fighter. Yeah. Okay. Let's stay with that boxing ring. Okay, so in that ring, it's you. Describe it to me. And who or what else is there?
What else? I don't even know.
What are you fighting with?
I'm fighting with the safe route versus taking risks, basically.
And how is that represented in that picture? Because you gave me a picture of a boxing ring. Do you see a picture?
You know what? It's not even, there isn't even a particular person that I'm fighting or thing I'm fighting. Well, my mom is there, but I'm not fighting her.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's not like I'm boxing her or anything, but so, I don't know. You know what? I think there's a bunch of things. It's almost like there's a bunch of things that I've been fighting, and the more I've learned and I took a leave of absence from teaching. This is my second year of leave of absence, which means that, I took 2 years off. I'm supply teaching, which means I'm a substitute.
Yeah.
So I go in and just do my job and go home, which I absolutely love and don't mind at all, because then it kind of releases me from the whole burden and responsibility of the planning and the marking, and which consumed me. It literally just consumed me. I had no life.
Whenever your clients offer you a metaphor, it's an opportunity for you to understand how exactly they perceive their situation or their problem. The previous client offered me a metaphor for her current situation, her life at the current stage that feels like a boxing ring to her. Have you noticed how describing that boxing ring led her right into her current job? In order to find out more about how she feels about her job, I could simply ask her, how's your situation at work similar to that boxing ring? Why would I do that? When people are in a difficult emotional place, they find it hard to even identify words that would describe what they're feeling. And it's much easier for them to use a metaphor in order to tell you what's going on for them. On top of that, metaphors also give them an opportunity to feel less exposed when sharing parts of their life that they're uncomfortable with or even ashamed of. In fact, a New Zealand therapist, David Grove, who is a pioneer in using metaphor for healing purposes, realized while working with trauma victims that the most effective way for his clients to be healed of their trauma was to ask them to describe their emotions and feelings in metaphor. Now, if your clients don't give you that metaphor right away, like the previous client you just heard, you can always ask them. In the following excerpt, my goal was to understand what my client means when she says that she's procrastinating. Because as soon as I understand how she perceives her problem, I'm more likely to help her effectively.
But I procrastinate, right? And I don't know where procrastination is on that.
The way I approach procrastination is simple. Procrastination means it's like we're having two voices in our head, and each one wants to go in a different direction, opposite. So one of you says, okay, do this. You know, you want to do things that will fulfill you. You've had enough of this. You want to contribute. You want to make a difference in your life. Just do it. You're a businesswoman. You know how to do it. And then there's this other voice that keeps pulling you in the opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's exactly, you're in my head, yeah.
Exactly. So let's just look at this other voice. What's that voice telling you? Describe the first one also with your own words. Like the one that wants to move you forward, and then what does the other one say?
I mean, you basically described it. It's exactly that. I mean, it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't have any other words. And I mean, you know, what stops me from doing it is I have this other fear that I've been working through, that I'm not smart enough to do this.
Another great reason to use metaphors in your practice is that they're a way of putting your client at ease and help them relax a little about what's going on for them. Let me demonstrate that through the first call with Janet that's in your Module 2 coaching calls. Janet opens the call by saying she's stuck. Stuck because she has a job that pays well, but one that she doesn't like. She's stuck because she signed up for a coaching training thinking that becoming a coach might be a good alternative for her, but never did anything with it. On top of feeling stuck, she beats herself up for not being appreciative of all the good things she has in her life. Please listen to Janet's voice before the marathon metaphor is introduced to her, as well as to how it sounds afterwards. You will notice that she sounds softer and more relaxed, especially at the very end of the excerpt when she says, "Yeah, makes sense."
And you know, Crystal, I was at your retreat in October because I live in Oshawa, so I mean, it was quite convenient, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and I was at your retreat, and one of the things that when we do the circle at the end there was, okay, so what is your phrase?
What's Courage going to have you do?
What's Courage going to have me do? And what did I say? I was going to be the next Crystal Andrus. She said, no, you said you're going to be the next Janet.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to be yourself.
Right.
And I still left there pumped and never did anything after again. So when I go
all
home,
part of the journey. I will tell you this, Janet.
Okay.
You know when someone runs a marathon?
Yeah.
This is the best way I can explain it. When someone runs a marathon, they didn't go that morning and run a marathon. They probably 5 years before they ran the marathon were thinking, I think I would like to run a marathon. And they didn't do anything about it. And then maybe a year late after that, they thought, you know what, I should get some running shoes and start walking. And then maybe they bought the running shoes and didn't start walking. And then maybe a year after that, everybody's got a different timeline. Some people say I'm going to run a marathon, but even if they went out the very next day and did it, it's going to take 3 to 6 months of training. So there is the thinking about something, and then there's the thinking about it, and then there's the doing it. And honest to God, every part of it is as equally important as finally graduating as a SWAT student or making a life change.
Okay.
There really is. Like the thinking about it is as important as finally thinking about it. Thinking about doing it. It sounds so silly, but it's actually an important part of change. So I think a lot of times we think I'm stuck when we realize change is not easy, especially if you're in a job where you're making money that's paying the bills in an economy where a lot of people are afraid of giving that up or even wishing they had it. It takes some courage. It takes a lot of courage and a plan. And if you haven't really sat down to create a plan of how am I going to get from A, because you're not going from A to B, you're going from A to Z.
Right.
So how do I get from A to Z? Well, if that's an overwhelming process, then it really is like running a marathon. You actually have to get a training schedule, and then you got to look at your calendar, and then you got to figure out when am I going to do my short runs, when am I going to fit in that one long run a week, so it takes time to actually get motivated enough to say, they say great change comes from either complete inspiration or complete desperation. Right. And that's why it's the woman that has that last 10 or 20 pounds to lose, or changing a job that's not that bad. It's the hardest for us. Mm-hmm. Because you're not desperate enough that you have to change. If you got fired tomorrow from your job, you'd probably just jump 2 feet in first into SWAT, and you'd be a coach within a very short period of time because you have to.
And that's the easy way, right? You lose your job, you get the package. That's what everybody looks for, getting the package.
Right,
and then
that's
you can
why
jump into something else.
Yeah, that's why people stay in things they hate forever, because it's actually harder to have the courage to honor yourself and make a change when it's not desperate.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense.
Metaphors are one of the fastest ways to learn new information. Because they are, in essence, symbols, they allow us to make new associations very fast. Therefore, you might take advantage of this feature whenever you want to explain a new concept to your client, or when you want to expand their understanding of something they already know. This may come in handy when you want to shift them from a lower emotional state on the map of empowerment to a higher one. The following piece shows you how to describe the level of apathy or victimhood in a metaphoric way.
It's almost like, and I was just thinking the other day, I'm going to do this in one of my talks. If I could, I was thinking, I want to explain to people who don't understand when someone feels stuck what it feels like. It's like, being at the bottom of a dark well, and you're way down at the bottom, and you have no idea because you can barely. There's no light. There's light way at the top, but you can't see even 2 inches above your head. And it's like telling that person they have choices. They're stuck, and you're stuck. And you use those words. If you listen to the very first call we had, you use the words, I'm stuck. And stuck is like being at the bottom of the well. And when I try to explain this to other coaches, like this is what it's like for your client. So just trying to give them a motivational talk is not going to work.
No.
So it's like I turn off all the lights and I make everybody plug their ears.
Right.
And then I whisper into the microphone and say, do you hear all your choices? Can you hear them? Can you see them? No.
Right.
And slowly, as you start to become less stuck, I let them unplug their ears, and then it's just dark. And then I turn up the lights very slowly, and suddenly they can begin seeing me, and then they can see everybody that's in the room, and then they can see where all the doorways are, and then they can see where the light switches are. And then they all of a sudden realize there's all these other places to go and things they can do.
Right. That's good on analogy.
Yeah, so right now it seems overwhelming to you because you're not doing this every day of your life, and you don't realize there's hundreds of choices for you. It feels like there's really none except this one choice, which is stay spinning your wheels and feeling frustrated and being stuck, but that's broken.
Shifting your clients from apathy into grief will often be the goal of your coaching interventions. Therefore, you might want to add to your repertoire a couple of metaphors that will help you with this. In the next piece, Crystal uses the analogy of the dark night of the soul to explain to her client that she suffered a great loss and that nonetheless great gifts can come from her situation.
that beauty isn't just beauty that's because you've got a nice-looking face or you have a great body. That's not the beauty I'm talking about. It's a beauty from deep within. But what happens to us through the course of our lives, sometimes things happen. And you had what another one of my great, I love he has a book called The Divine Matrix. And he talks about the dark night of the soul. And I would love for you, and I almost want to go and find that book and just quickly read to you, but the dark night of the soul is sometimes when we don't have, I want to pull it out. I'm actually going to find, I've got this book right here. I want to just really quickly, I won't read you the whole thing, but I want to really quickly read something. The dark night of the soul. He talks about sort of these mirrors of relationships and how, that we can use relationships in our life to really grow, and sometimes it's hard to understand why things are happening. And when I think of you and I think of the dark night of the soul, and I'm going to go back to the dimmer switch because it's really important that I finish explaining this to you. The dark night of the soul is sort of like when everything just sort of, we can't even believe our life was going a certain way, and it just feels like it falls apart. And we're alone in our home late at night, and we're crying, or we're just in shock. How did our life become this? And we have this moment. It's like the dark night of the soul. And even when I read your letter and I see that you've gone through some dark nights, and even though I know you don't like that it happened, and you don't like that it's taken 4 years to decide that you're ready to step back into your power, you had a dark night of the soul. And what a dark night of the soul is, again, going back to this book, The Divine Matrix, I just want to read it to you. The purpose of the dark night of the soul is for us to experience and heal our own great fears. The really interesting thing about the dark night is that because everyone's fears are different, what looks like a frightening experience for one person may be no big deal to someone else. So he talked about in this story, he talks about a man who his marriage splits up after years of sort of being passing in the night, and it was shocking. And he says, for example, Gerald, who's in the book, admitted that his worst fear was being left by himself. He says, I'd spoken with a woman earlier that the same evening who told her that being alone was her greatest joy. He goes on to say, it's not uncommon for someone who fears being alone to become a master at relationships in which they'll experience their fear. So I don't want to get too much into this whole reading to you, but while we may go through dark nights of the soul through our lifetimes, the first one is usually the toughest. It's also frequently the most powerful agent of change. Once we understand why we hurt so much, the experience begins to take on a new meaning. As we recognize the signposts of a dark night, we can say, aha, I know that pattern. Yep, it's definitely a dark night of the soul, all right. Now what is it that I'm being asked to master? He goes on just to finish this little bit. He says, I know people who are so empowered once they heal their dark night experiences that they almost dare the universe to bring on the next one. And they do so simply because they know that if they've survived the first, they can survive anything. It's only when we have such experiences without understanding what they are or why we're having them that we find ourselves locked into years or even lifetimes of a pattern that can literally steal the very things from us that we hold most dear, such as life itself. You had a dark night of the soul 6 years ago. So I'm telling you that your dimmer switch, it's naturally been turned down. It's been turned down. And it doesn't matter that you want clarity. You're in the dark right now. Your little light that you could normally shine, that could be so powerful, has just been turned right down. The great news is that you're the controller of the dial. And once you learn what we're going to do together, you're going to start to realize, oh my gosh, here I go. How am I going to be strong, powerful, courageous? How am I going to make things happen? How am I going to start making money when I'm down at a 2? Because that's not the place that money's made. So of course, when I hear you talk and you go, I just don't understand, and I've read every book and I've done but of course, you had a dark night of the soul. You had your life sort of headed on track. But the great news is that was the best thing the universe could have done for you.
Women often want to avoid grief at all costs. And I don't mean just sadness, but those prolonged periods of emotional pain that really feel like a dark night of the soul. They want to skip it and get to that beautiful sunny place as fast as they can. It is as though grieving and processing their loss was something almost abnormal, something they are supposed to shake off and get over with really fast. The next excerpt explains in a beautiful way what grief means. The time in our life when we slow down and start to operate in a protective mode. It is a temporary setback that we all have or will experience simply because we are human. The cocoon metaphor, as well as the boat metaphor you will hear shortly, put loss and grief into a truly empowering perspective.
So the knockdowns come along and we regroup and sort of we pull back and we get quiet and we I like to think of it as the story of sort of like you really do go into a cocoon at times, like we have to cocoon ourselves in. So there is a protective gift that can sometimes come from that. But when all of a sudden you've put yourself in a bit of a protective cocoon, your mother's died now, your heart's been really wounded, you're in protection mode. And in that protection mode, you are not resonating at that high, magnificent, fast-moving pace where money's flowing and everything's coming and everything's arriving because you moved out of that frequency. So that's all that's happening. What's happened is you shifted down into a lower frequency because you were a human being and you were hurt. So all of a sudden you go from, let's say you're at a 10 to all of a sudden you're down in like 4 grieving. Your mother's died. That's protection. This person has really hurt you. That's grieving. That's like you're at a 4. It's like you're getting off the ride. You're not in that fast-paced flow of life. So you've just sort of said, wow, this flow is flowing too fast for me right now. And I'm actually going to, the best way I like to use it as an analogy is like you're in this riverboat. And when you're in the flow, man, you don't even have to paddle. Like you're just flowing, like you're in Whitewater Rapids, and they're just taking you, and you're like, oh my God, this is an adventure, and you're going where you need to go, and everything's clicking. But sometimes something happens that scares you, or your boat gets flipped over, right? So that's all that's happened. Your boat gets flipped over, and you swim to the shore, and you climb on the bank, and you say, I'm going to sit here for a little while because I wasn't expecting the boat to get flipped over in the middle of those Whitewater Rapids. I was thinking this was all just going to be one exciting adventure. So you pull your boat up and you sit over and you're over at sort of one of the ports. I like to think of them as a port of call. Like I'm going to just sit in my grief right now. I'm over here grieving. And I know how to get back in the boat. I'm not sure I want to yet. And when I'm sitting over here in this place that I need to be, because that's a part of being a human being, and I'm pondering and I'm feeling and I'm crying or I'm not crying, but it's still there and it's buried deep or it's right at the surface, whatever it is, I'm not in the flow of making money. How could I be?
If you're thinking, well, most of these examples, like the dark night of the soul or the boat analogy, are not just a way of explaining new concepts to clients, but they also give them hope and inspiration, then you're on the right track. Yes, metaphors can be used as reframes of your client's situation, which is one of the most powerful ways of using metaphors. You may have realized that some of the major concepts we use in empowerment coaching are nothing else but an empowering metaphor. Take the map of empowerment itself. Isn't that a metaphor big time? Isn't that a way of showing your clients that not only you understand what's going on for them, but also giving them hope that they can get to a better place and showing them that you have a plan for them that consists in climbing those emotional levels one by one? Another way of inspiring and motivating your clients through a metaphor is using other people's lives as an analogy. Sally, a client in one of our Module 2 coaching calls, was shy and she felt awkward as a result of it. Listen to an example of an uplifting metaphor that will leave Sally feeling like there's hope for her because her coach has experience with people like herself.
Yeah, okay. No, I totally, you know what? You totally remind me of someone, although not to the same degree, but I worked with a woman she was a girl. I would call her a girl at the time because you're 42, and she was only in her early 20s. Yeah. And she had actually, she was so shy that she would call it shy, but I think it was severe anxiety. Mm-hmm. And she would get herself so worked up. She was a teacher, and it was amazing that she was so unbelievable with the children, mm-hmm. but had so much anxiety she couldn't even go into the staff room because it was just this uncomfortable feeling of, and I got to know her so well, and she made incredible breakthroughs. It took practice, but incredible breakthroughs. She had never even been on a date because she had too much anxiety over the idea of what do I do and how. And she was beautiful. I got to actually meet her. She was, and she was a really attractive young woman. And she just got married last year and has had a total turnaround. She's at a new school, and she's just done amazing. So, I mean, you're not in that severe of a situation where it just feels, but the same thing. She had very quiet sort of parents. They weren't really social. They didn't teach her those skills. It wasn't modeled for her, and it was just an awkwardness. And the more that she gave power to that awkwardness, the more it just grew, right? It's like that saying, whatever you give attention to, you give power to.
Right, yeah.
Finally, metaphors are a great way to distract our conscious mind and stop being caught up in our stories. Every time our brain recognizes something that disturbs a pattern, that is, a stimulus that has novelty built into it, it does two things. First of all, it starts to pay attention to that novel stimulus. And second, it starts its pattern-finding mission once again to recreate a sense of stability. Because metaphors offer a combination of things that are familiar and similar to your client's situation, as well as those that don't quite correspond to their story, they act as powerful pattern interrupts. It is like someone giving you a little jolt that results into looking at the familiar with new eyes.
And we're going to write to them what they did to you, how they behaved and treated you, and how their choices for you have affected your life, not only in the past, but how it's still affecting you to this day. Let me just tell you before why we do it. I would love you to imagine a ship sailing in the middle of the ocean. And let's just imagine that ship drops the anchor in the middle of that ocean, okay? And the ship starts sailing, and luckily the rope that's attached to the anchor is long, okay? So the anchor is in the middle of the ocean, and the ship keeps sailing, and that wire, that rope is so long that the captain of the ship doesn't even realize that he forgot to actually get that anchor on board again, okay? Because, the ship is not being pulled back yet. But when we have things from our past that are a little bit unresolved inside us, that feel like it should have been different, it should have gone a different way, and that person and the other person should have behaved differently. When we have things like that inside us that were not given a voice, it's like when that ship's sailing and eventually the ship comes to a point where it can't move forward anymore because it's stuck there. Yep. So what we need to do is to go a little bit back and take that anchor back so that it doesn't tie us to our past. Because when we're tied like that to our past, and when we haven't given a voice to that part of us, that little person that has probably been hurt somewhere in the past, we get stuck, plain and simple, right? And that's where I feel that we are at the moment, that you are.
No, I heard something in what you said I haven't been actually very aware of it. That there's a very different perspective. The one that, okay, things should have been different, but this is this is what they are, and I got to deal with it, get on with it, or just really acknowledging that and there's a very difference whether you're nurturing the resentment, push through against it, or actually acknowledging it and leaving the stuff behind. And I haven't done that.
See, the beauty of metaphors is that your clients will make connections that maybe even you never thought of before. For instance, when I offered this ship and anchor metaphor to my client, I wanted to tell her that, look, unless we have a sense of completion and closure with our past, we get stuck, which is precisely why we have to take a couple of steps back and go to those uncomfortable places temporarily. However, her understanding went deeper than that. She said something very wise. She said, there's a difference in nurturing resentment, trying to push through it, and between acknowledging things and leaving that stuff behind. And I haven't done that. As you can imagine, having her realize that she did not acknowledge certain things that happened to her and that she did nurture resentment made her really receptive to the letter writing assignment that I later gave her. Let me recap. People use metaphors all the time. They're not just a figure of speech, but a way our brain represents what we experience. Learning how to use them for the benefit of your clients is a way of making you an even better coach than you already are. Ladies, I don't know about you, but I had so much fun preparing this lecture for you. And it's because metaphors are fun. Please make the most of the information you learned today and try to incorporate metaphors into your coaching work in one way or another. I guarantee you will not regret it. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.